Associate Professor Snezana Maljevic is head of the Epilepsy Functional Genomic Laboratory at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience. We're going to talk about epilepsy. And I must say, when I read that 1 in 100 people have epilepsy and more than half of those are from hereditary factors, that took me a little by surprise.
Yeah, I know. It is not really known that 1% is affected by epilepsy. I think that would mean that we all know somebody who has seizures or has epilepsy. And, this is probably also due to the fact that this is also one of the most stigmatized disorders, because having epilepsy means having epileptic seizures. And those were not something people wanted to talk about for many years.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that was also that we didn't know what causes them. So instead of this genetic term or hereditary epilepsy, for a long time we just called these epilepsies idiopathic epilepsy, which means we don't know where they come from. So I think genetic is now a good term because finally we have some explanation.
Right. So does it follow then that if you're from a family where there's a family member who does suffer from epilepsy, there's a chance that somebody else in the family will have the same situation?
Increased chance, yes. I mean, it doesn't, it is always, of course, a chance that it is just once or that, something else happens and you combine your genes in a proper way. But the thing is that, yes, there is a strong hereditary component. So once there is somebody affected in the family, you would usually look, or once you have a patient in front of you, you would usually ask if somebody in the family has
of course.
Seizures. This is normally how it goes.
Are we closer to understanding why some people are affected by it?
So as I said, some epilepsies are caused by structural changes in the brain. So that would mean there is some injury to the brain. There is a tumor or stroke or anything happening that is kind of changing the structure, and that can be actually a trigger for seizures. But 50% or more than 50% have that genetic component, and it doesn't always mean that the epilepsy comes from parents or from the family. It can also occur de novo, so it can happen for the first time in a person that is just now in front of the clinician affected. And that still can include genetic factors. So it's like a printing error happened in one of the genes that comes from one of the parents. And the parents are not affected, but children can be. So there is also that component. So that's also possible to happen. And that's actually what we are studying mostly.
So if your epileptic seizure is brought on by a tumour or an injury of some kind, what part of the brain is it actually having an impact on?
I'm not a complete expert on that, but I think it can be any, it just depends how it's positioned. So, of course, we always think cortex is the one that is influenced and where you would have pressure on some neurons and making some focus that can then become epileptiform. But it doesn't really, I don't think there is like a specific rule for that.
Yeah.
It is just that we know that when we look into the brain of these people, you would see that there is a change. So there is, it doesn't look normal. You can look at the pictures and you would say like, oh, there is something here, some lesion or some change, and that can actually trigger epilepsy.
What can you tell me about the work you did with the family of a young child who actually approached you to try and help their situation?
Well, I had to say this situation where I explained that child gets epilepsy but parents are not affected, that has become apparent only in the last 10 years, because now it is possible to quickly screen and look into genes and sequence them and then compare the genes of a child with genes of parents. And this is how we found out that many of the very severe forms of epilepsy that happen in children, and that are not only epilepsy, but usually these children don't have a proper development, so they develop intellectual disability or autism or movement disorder or behavioral problems. So this is a really severely affected group of patients that they all have that new acquired change in one of their genes. That is what is causing the disease. So we've been working with families in Australia that are actually grouped in one of the, I just want to give them a shout out, Genetic Epilepsy Team Australia is a group of parents with kids that have mutations in many different genes. And, we kind of collaborate with them. It's really changing the whole way how we do our research now, because we have the patients in front of us and we know that we can help, separate individuals. So we kind of have better impression of what is the impact of the research we do.
This is an interesting question, Snezana, that came through via text. And the question is, I suffered from childhood epilepsy and was wondering if anyone could explain why it had a chance to go away when they reached adolescence.
Yeah, well, we are trying to understand that, yes. So we know that there are forms of epilepsy that occur in certain periods of time, and it's kind of really a typical occurrence. I don't think we have a proper explanation at this point. We do talk about, gene patterns in the brain development and how things are changing also with Adelaide, with puberty and hormones and everything, but we don't have like a concrete explanation for each of these epilepsies. We just know that certain types of epilepsy are actually, stopping spontaneously, so to say, or stopping at some period of time, which is probably where the brain finds a way to, level everything up and kind of function.
It is an amazing thing. It is an amazing thing, the brain. But so that's not uncommon that it just disappears on its own for no apparent reason.
For some types of epilepsy, yes. That's not uncommon. That is actually part of their pattern, so how they present.
What about medications? How effective are medications against epilepsy now?
That is really interesting question, because when I started working in this field, we were having the sentence that 1/3 of patients do not respond to current therapies. And unfortunately, that number hasn't really changed much. So this is around 30% of patients cannot be, or seizures in 30% of patients cannot be stopped by current medications. So that's kind of still a pretty large number, I think.
Yeah, and I guess anybody who does suffer from epilepsy would really be looking for some sort of way of reducing it, wouldn't they? And if medication doesn't work, it's, obviously frustrating.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you, people who are treated for epilepsy, it's not usually only one medication. It is usually several and combinations, and they have to, start building up slowly. And then if they want to change medication, they have to stop taking them slowly. So it's really a lot of pain with if it doesn't work, if you don't find a proper therapy quickly, then it can be a long search.
Is surgery an option?
Yes, for some patients, yes. Especially like if it's possible to detect that kind of focus or epileptic form part of brain, so you can kind of, screen the activity and see that it's usually a certain spot where the seizures would start. So you could potentially, if that's not the most important part of the brain, you could treat and remove or surgically treat that. But it is not option for everybody, and especially for genetic epilepsies, it is not really the option.
Yeah, and you talked about the stigma around epilepsy. I think that's probably largely because people, they're concerned they wouldn't know how to cope if they do come across somebody who is having an epileptic seizure.
Yes. So, you would. The most severe seizures. So I guess we will probably won't, it's not common. So it's like 1 in 100 people would be affected, but not all of them would have those seizures that we kind of imagine, that what we call generalized tonic-clonic, so which include a lot of movements and unconsciousness and lying on the floor and screaming and everything that we could see in the movies. So many seizures, and your listener who mentioned childhood epilepsy, so there is childhood absence epilepsy. It's just a seizure that lasts a few seconds, and it's actually nothing happening except for the person staring for a few seconds and not really being responsive. So yes, and they can have up to 100 of those seizures per day. And it's really difficult to pick up for parents because, normally we all have our absence moments. So kind of would normally notice that on videos, that the children are running and then one of them stops and then continues and they don't remember. Okay. They're not aware of that stop.
Yeah. Associate Professor Snezana Maljevic, thank you so much indeed for your time this afternoon.
And no worries. Thank you very much.
Bye for now. Head of the Epilepsy Functional Genomic Laboratory at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health.